A shy tech millionaire hired a poor woman to pretend she was his girlfriend, but when she spoke at dinner, everyone was shocked. Steve Clark lived 47 floors above a city that never stopped talking, but somehow, he'd never learned its language. Picture this: floor-to-ceiling windows that stretched like movie screens, showing off a skyline worth billions. Chrome and glass everywhere, sleek as a spaceship. An AI system that chirped, "Good morning, Steve," with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever every single day at 6:30 a.m. sharp. But here's the thing about having everything money can buy. It doesn't buy the one thing that matters most. No one to say welcome home, like they actually meant it. Steve was 35 years old, painfully intelligent, the kind of smart that made professors weep with joy and normal people feel slightly uncomfortable at dinner parties. Hopelessly awkward in the way that only brilliant people can be, like his brain was wired for algorithms instead of small talk. And oh, he was rich. Not just wealthy, real rich. The kind of money that came from building something the world didn't know it needed until it couldn't live without it. Connect Core. Maybe you've heard of it? He'd built apps that helped people find each other, talk to each other, fall in love with each other. His code could predict compatibility better than your grandmother's intuition, better than those magazine quizzes, better than years of therapy. Millions of people had found their soulmates because of something Steve created in his basement 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Not for a second. Because Steve Clark, the man who'd revolutionized human connection, couldn't look someone in the eye and say what he felt if his life depended on it. Which brings us to Tuesday morning, when everything changed. He was standing in his kitchen, marble countertops that cost more than most people's cars, when his assistant Marcus walked in holding an envelope like it might explode. "Sir," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice. Something careful. "This came for you." The envelope was cream-colored. Expensive paper. The kind that whispered "important event" before you even opened it. Steve's name was written in calligraphy so perfect it looked like a computer font. But it wasn't his name that made his stomach drop. It was the return address. Olivia Chin Morrison. His ex-fiancée. The woman who'd said yes to his proposal, then no to everything else. The woman who'd looked at him 3 years ago and said, "I can't marry someone who loves his code more than he could ever love me." She'd been wrong about that. Dead wrong. But by the time he'd figured out how to tell her, she was already gone. His hands shook. Actually shook, as he opened the envelope. Wedding invitation. Gold lettering. Her name next to some guy called David Morrison, who probably knew how to order wine without Googling the pronunciation first. The wedding was in 3 weeks. And of course, she'd invited him. "Sir." Marcus was still standing there, watching Steve's face go through approximately 17 different shades of pale. "Are you all right?" "She's getting married," Steve said, and his voice sounded strange. "Hello. I'm sorry." She moved on. Fast. Marcus didn't say anything to that. What was there to say? 3 years felt like forever when you were the one left behind. But apparently, it was just enough time for someone else to figure out what Steve never could. That's when Rita burst in. Rita Santos, his publicist, was a force of nature wrapped in designer suits and red lipstick that could stop traffic. She took one look at the invitation in Steve's hands, and her eyes went laser-focused. "Oh, hell no," she said, snatching the invitation. She did not. "Rita, she invited you to watch her marry someone else? That's not closure, honey. That's psychological warfare." Steve slumped against the counter. "Maybe she's just being polite." Rita looked at him like he'd just suggested the earth was flat. "Polite? Baby, polite is sending a Christmas card. This." She waved the invitation like evidence in a murder trial. "This is her expecting you to show up alone, miserable, and prove to everyone that poor little Steve Clark is still the awkward genius who can't get the girl." The words hit harder than they should have. Probably because they were true. "I don't have to go," Steve said weakly. "Oh, you're going." Rita's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "But we're going to ruin her expectations." "How?" Rita started pacing, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown timer. "You're going to walk into that wedding with the most stunning, intelligent, captivating woman anyone's ever seen. Someone who makes Olivia look like a participation trophy. I don't know anyone like that." "Then we hire someone." Steve nearly choked on his coffee. "Hire someone? Like an escort?" "Not an escort. You beautiful, naive man. An actress. Someone professional. Someone who doesn't look like she stepped out of a catalog, because that's too obvious, but someone who can steal a room with her words. Someone who makes people lean in when she talks. The idea was insane. Completely insane. But as Steve stared at that invitation, at Olivia's perfect calligraphy next to another man's name, something desperate clawed at his chest. How would we even find someone like that? Rita's grin was positively predatory. Leave that to me. 1 week later, Steve was sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, fidgeting with his sleeve and wondering if this was the worst idea he'd ever had. The cafe was nothing like the places he usually went. No marble, no chrome, no baristas who knew his order by heart. Just mismatched chairs, the smell of fresh bread, and the kind of warm chaos that made him feel like an alien observing human life. Steve. He looked up and forgot how to breathe. She wasn't what he'd expected. Not at all. Lily Carter was real. That was the only word for it. She had the kind of face that didn't need Instagram filters, soft features, dark hair that looked like she'd actually touched it instead of having a team style it, and eyes that held something he couldn't quite name. Intelligence, yes, but more than that. Fire. Carefully controlled, but definitely there. Hi, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. You look terrified. Direct. He liked that. A little, he admitted. She smiled, and something inside his chest flickered awake. Rita told me about the wedding. About your ex. Right? The job. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. The job. Right. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Her shoes were scuffed. Her nails were chipped from what looked like actual work, not just typing on expensive laptops. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, he felt like she was seeing something no one else had bothered to notice. So, she said, leaning back in her chair. Tell me about her. The ex-fiancé. Olivia. Her name still tasted complicated in his mouth. She's perfect. On paper. Smart, successful, beautiful. Knows exactly what to say in every situation. And she was probably right to leave. Lily tilted her head. Why? The question caught him off guard. People didn't usually ask why. They just accepted that someone like Olivia would naturally outgrow someone like him. I'm not exactly boyfriend material, he said. I work too much. I don't know how to connect. Ironically, you built apps that help people connect. Easier to write code than to actually do it yourself. She was quiet for a moment, studying him. Then, where did you grow up? Foster care. Different homes. What? Something in her expression softened. Me too. 2 words. But they carried weight. Really? She nodded. 11 different families. Aged out at 18. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. Funny how that shapes you, isn't it? Always feeling like you're performing. Like you have to earn your place at the table. Steve stared at her. In 5 minutes, this woman had seen something that Rita, Marcus, even Olivia had missed completely. Rita said you work at a bakery? 2 jobs, actually. Bakery in the morning, tutoring at night. And I paint sometimes, when I can afford the supplies. What do you paint? Things I remember. Things I want to remember. She shrugged. Not very good, but it helps. There was something about the way she said it. Like art wasn't about being good, it was about survival. I'd like to see them sometime, he heard himself say. She looked surprised. Really? Really? And for the first time in 3 years, Steve meant something he'd said to a woman. But here's the thing about moments like that, they don't last. Because reality has a way of creeping back in. So, Lily said, all business again. The wedding. What's the plan? Right. The job. The pretending. Just be my girlfriend. For one night. Make it look believable. How believable? Believable enough that she knows I moved on too. Lily nodded slowly. And after the wedding? After the wedding, you go back to your life. I go back to mine. Rita pays you what we agreed on, and everyone's happy. Everyone's happy, she repeated. But something in her voice made it sound like a question. 3 weeks later, Steve stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 7th time. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel. Of course Olivia had chosen the Plaza. Steve's hands were shaking. 35 years old, worth more money than most small countries, and he was terrified of a dinner party. Sir. Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding Steve's phone. Miss Carter is here. Lily. For 3 weeks, they'd met twice more. Coffee both times. Planning sessions, Rita had called them. Getting their story straight. Learning enough about each other to make the lie believable. But every time Steve saw her, something shifted inside his chest. Something dangerous. She was nothing like Olivia. Where Olivia was polished steel, Lily was warm wood. Where Olivia spoke in perfectly crafted sentences, Lily said exactly what she meant. Where Olivia fit into his world like she'd been designed for it, Lily stood out like a splash of color on a black and white photograph. Which was exactly the point, he reminded himself. She was supposed to stand out. She was supposed to make Olivia notice. She was supposed to be temporary. Steve walked to his living room and stopped dead. Lily stood by the windows, looking out at the city lights, and she was stunning. Not stunning in the way Olivia was stunning. All sharp edges and calculated perfection. Lily was stunning like a sunset. Natural. Warm. The kind of beautiful that made you forget to breathe. Rita had picked out the dress. Deep emerald green. Elegant, but not trying too hard. It fit Lily like it had been made for her, bringing out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. But it wasn't the dress that made Steve's heart stutter. It was the way she carried herself. Like she didn't care that she didn't belong in his world, because maybe, in some strange way, she did. "You clean up nice," she said, turning to face him. "You look." He searched for words and came up empty. "Beautiful." Something flickered across her face. Too quick to catch. "Rita's work," she said. "I feel like I'm playing dress up." "You don't look it." Their eyes met. Held. And for a moment, Steve forgot this was all pretend. "Ready?" she asked. "No." The word slipped out before he could stop it. "But let's go anyway." The car ride to the hotel was quiet. Lily stared out the window while Steve tried not to stare at her. "Nervous?" she asked without looking at him. "Terrified," he admitted. "Good. Means you care." "About what?" She turned to face him then, and her expression was unreadable. "About how this goes." The Plaza Ballroom was exactly what Steve had expected. Gold chandeliers hanging like artificial halos. White tablecloths so crisp they could cut glass. Flowers that probably cost more than most people's rent. And people. Lots of people. The kind of people who used words like summer as a verb and knew which fork to use for the salad course. Steve's stomach clenched. Then Lily slipped her hand into his, and somehow, it got easier. "Breathe," she whispered. "I've got you." They walked in together. People turned. Not everyone. This wasn't a movie, but enough. Enough to notice that Steve Clark, the shy tech genius, had arrived with a woman nobody recognized. A woman who walked like she owned the room despite never having been in a room like it before. "Steve." He turned, and there she was. Olivia. 3 years had been kind to her. She looked exactly the same. Perfect blonde hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile that revealed perfect teeth. Her wedding dress probably cost more than Lily's entire wardrobe. But standing next to Lily, something about Olivia looked diminished. Like a photograph that had faded just slightly. "I'm so glad you came," Olivia said, her eyes already sliding to Lily with barely concealed curiosity. "Wouldn't miss it," Steve managed. "And you must be." Olivia's smile stretched wider, more predatory. Lily said, extending her hand. "Lily Carter. How lovely. And how did you two meet?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was it. The moment they'd rehearsed. Lily was supposed to say they'd met at a tech conference. Something boring and believable that would satisfy Olivia's curiosity without being too interesting. Instead, Lily smiled. Really smiled, the kind that reached her eyes, and said, "We met at a shelter. I was serving soup. He was hiding." A hush fell over their small circle. Steve's heart stopped. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't what they'd practiced. But Lily kept going, her voice warm and sure. "He was donating anonymously, of course. Trying to slip in and out without anyone noticing. That's how I found out he had a soul." Soft laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Then silence. Then interest. Real interest. People leaned closer. Olivia's perfect smile faltered just slightly. "How?" "Charitable," Olivia said, and there was something sharp in her voice. "He is," Lily said simply, though he'd die before admitting it. More laughter. Warmer this time. And Steve realized something incredible was happening. Lily wasn't just playing a part. She was telling a story. A story so real, so vivid, that he almost believed it himself. More importantly, everyone else believed it too. For the next hour, people kept finding excuses to talk to them, to ask Lily questions, to hear more about this mysterious woman who'd captured Steve Clark's heart. And she was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. She spoke to the tech executives about coding boot camps for underprivileged kids. She discussed art with the gallery owners. She made the society wives laugh with stories about her morning regulars at the bakery. She fit. Somehow, impossibly, she fit. But it was more than that. She made him fit. For the first time in his life, Steve felt like he belonged in a room full of people. Because Lily made him feel like he belonged with her. Dinner was announced. They found their seats, thankfully not at Olivia's table, but close enough to be visible. Someone asked the question again. So how did you two really meet? And Lily, without missing a beat, launched into the story again. But this time, she added details. Little things that made it more real. How Steve had tried to sneak past the volunteer check-in. How he'd gotten flustered when she'd asked for his name. How he'd donated enough money to fund the shelter's entire holiday program, but acted like he'd just dropped $1 in the collection plate. He's modest to a fault, she said, reaching over to squeeze Steve's hand. Drives me crazy sometimes. The touch sent electricity up his arm. Around them, people smiled, nodded, bought every word. But later, when they stepped into the hallway for air, Steve finally found his voice. Why did you change the story? Lily leaned against the marble wall, suddenly looking tired. Because if I'd told them the truth, that you paid me to pretend, we'd both be standing alone in there. But the shelter story made you look human, real, like someone worth loving. The words hit him like a physical blow. Lily, she pushed off the wall, straightening her shoulders. We should go back. People will notice if we're gone too long. But as she started to walk past him, Steve caught her arm. Thank you, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. For what? For making me look like someone worth loving. Something shifted in her expression. Something soft and dangerous. You are someone worth loving, Steve, she said quietly. You just don't know it yet. And for one perfect, terrifying moment, Steve wished with everything he had that this wasn't pretend. That the woman looking at him like he mattered, really mattered, wasn't being paid to be there. That when the night ended, she wouldn't disappear back into her real life, leaving him alone with the memory of what it felt like to belong somewhere. But wishes don't change reality. And reality was waiting for them back in that ballroom, where Olivia was getting married to someone else, and Lily was still just playing a part, even if it was the most convincing performance of her life. After the wedding, something shifted. Not all at once. Steve wasn't the kind of man who made dramatic gestures or sudden declarations. But slowly, like code compiling line by line, things began to change. It started with a text message. Thanks for tonight. You were incredible. E. Lily's response came an hour later. Just doing my job. But then, 3 days later, another text. Would you like to have dinner? Not for work. Just dinner. The pause before her reply felt like forever. Real dinner or fake dinner? Real, he typed back, and his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Okay. So they started having dinners. Real ones. Not at the kind of restaurants where Steve usually ate. Places with names he couldn't pronounce and wine lists thicker than novels. Instead, they went to hole-in-the-wall places that Lily knew. Vietnamese pho joints where the owner remembered her order. Mexican places where the salsa was so hot it made Steve's eyes water, but he kept eating it anyway because Lily laughed when he tried to be tough. And they talked. God, they talked. About everything. About nothing. About the foster homes they'd both survived. Different experiences, same scars. About the way certain smells could transport you back to being 8 years old and terrified. About dreams deferred and dreams that kept you awake at night. Lily told him about her painting. How she'd started because art supplies were free at one of her group homes, and it was the only thing that made her feel like she had control over something. Anything. Steve told her about the first program he'd ever written. A simple game where you collected virtual pets and took care of them. He'd been 12, living with a family who forgot to feed him half the time. The pets in his game never went hungry. We're both just trying to fix things, aren't we? Lily said one night, twirling lo mein noodles around her chopsticks with surprising skill. What do you mean? You build apps that help people connect because connection is what you've always wanted. I paint memories because I'm afraid of forgetting the few good ones I have. The observation hit him like a physical blow. True and painful, and somehow comforting all at once. But here's the thing about getting close to someone. Really close. When you're not supposed to, every moment becomes loaded. Every casual touch, every shared laugh, every comfortable silence carries weight it was never meant to hold. 3 weeks after the wedding, Steve found himself at Lily's apartment. It was nothing like his penthouse. Nothing like anywhere he'd ever lived. Tiny. Maybe 400 square feet above a bakery that made the whole building smell like cinnamon and hope. The walls were thin enough that you could hear Mrs. Chun next door watching her soap operas. The radiator clanked like it was angry about something. But it was hers. Completely, utterly hers. Books stacked everywhere. Not the leather-bound classics that decorated his shelves, but paperbacks with cracked spines and margins full of notes. A couch that had seen better decades, but looked comfortable enough to fall asleep on. Plants on every surface, thriving despite the dim light. And paintings. Everywhere. You said they weren't very good, Steve said, staring at a canvas propped against the wall. They're not. But he couldn't look away. The painting showed a woman and a little girl under a red umbrella, walking through rain that looked more like tears. Simple brushstrokes, maybe. Imperfect technique, sure. But there was something in it that made his chest ache. That's beautiful, he said. Lily looked at him strangely. You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was trying to solve an equation. You really mean that? I really mean that. Something shifted between them. Something dangerous and electric and inevitable. They were sitting on her beat-up couch, Chinese takeout containers scattered on the coffee table between them, when she asked the question that changed everything. What are we doing, Steve? He knew what she meant. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks. I don't know, he admitted. This wasn't supposed to happen. No, I'm not your girlfriend. Not really. The words stung more than they should have. I know. Lily pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. You don't talk about your family. The subject change caught him off guard. There's no one to talk about. Everyone has someone. Parents, siblings, cousins. Someone. I aged out of the system at 18. Haven't looked back since. She nodded slowly. You know what I think? What? I think you pretend your loneliness is a choice. But it's not. The observation hit like a slap. Clean and sharp and absolutely accurate. Maybe, he said carefully. It's okay, you know. To want things. To want people. Her voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. Like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. What if I'm bad at it? The question slipped out before he could stop it. What if I want something and I ruin it? Lily looked at him for a long time. Then she reached over and took his hand. What if you don't? But before he could answer, before he could say any of the thousand things crowding his throat, her phone rang. Work. A catering emergency at the bakery. She had to go. And just like that, the moment shattered. The next morning, Steve showed up at his office early, trying to bury himself in code and spreadsheets and anything that didn't remind him of the way Lily's hand felt in his. That's when Marcus found him. Marcus had worked for Steve for 10 years. Quiet, efficient Marcus who knew exactly how Steve liked his coffee and never asked questions about his personal life. Except today. Sir. Marcus knocked on the doorframe, even though the door was open. Can I speak with you? Of course. Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked nervous. I think I made a mistake, Steve said before Marcus could speak. With Lily. With everything. Marcus blinked. Then, to Steve's complete surprise, he smiled. That's progress. What? Making mistakes. Caring enough about something that you can mess it up. Marcus sat down across from Steve's desk. Can I tell you something? Steve nodded, too surprised to speak. I've worked for you for 10 years. You're brilliant. Kind. Generous to a fault. But you've never made a personal mistake before, because you've never tried anything personal before. Gee, thanks. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. What I'm saying is, maybe the mistake isn't falling for her. Maybe the mistake is thinking you don't deserve to. Steve stared at him. Since when do you give relationship advice? Since I've been watching you smile more in the past month than you have in the past 3 years. The words hit home. Should I tell her? Steve asked. How I feel? Yes. What if she doesn't feel the same way? What if she does? Marcus stood up, smoothing down his tie. Sir. Yeah. Tell yourself too. Tell myself what? That you're allowed to feel things. Even if you paid for the first conversation. That night, Steve couldn't sleep. He paced his penthouse, looking out at the city lights and thinking about red umbrellas and tiny apartments that smelled like cinnamon. He thought about the way Lily laughed when she was surprised. The way she argued with him about movies, completely unimpressed by his wealth or status. The way she'd made him feel, for one perfect night, like he belonged somewhere. Like he belonged with someone. At 2 a.m., he picked up his phone. Are you awake? Her response came immediately. Can't sleep either? Want some company? Three dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Yes. 20 minutes later, Steve stood outside Lily's apartment building with coffee from the all-night place down the street and his heart in his throat. She answered the door in pajama pants and an oversized sweater, hair messy from sleep she wasn't getting. She looked beautiful, real, like everything his sterile penthouse wasn't. Couldn't sleep? She asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Kept thinking. About you, he wanted to say. About us. About how this was supposed to be fake, but feels more real than anything I've ever had. Instead, he said, things. She studied his face in the dim hallway light. Come on up. But quietly. Mrs. Chun has ears like a hawk. Her apartment felt different at 2 a.m. Softer somehow. More intimate. The city lights filtered through her curtains, casting everything in a gentle glow. They sat on her couch, coffee cooling between them, and for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel loaded. It felt peaceful. Can I ask you something? Lily said. Sure. That night at the wedding, when I told the story about the shelter, you looked, I don't know, surprised. It wasn't what we'd practiced. No, it wasn't. She curled her legs under her. But it felt right. In the moment. Why? She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Because, she said finally, that's who you are. The kind of person who would hide in a soup kitchen because he wants to help but doesn't know how to accept gratitude. The kind of person who builds apps to help people connect because he understands loneliness. Something cracked open in Steve's chest. You don't know me that well, he said softly. Don't I? Their eyes met. Held. And for a moment, Steve thought about leaning over. About closing the distance between them. About finding out what it would feel like to kiss someone who saw him. Really saw him. Instead of his bank account or his reputation or his potential. But the moment passed. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, she's here because you're paying her. Don't forget that. So instead, he cleared his throat and changed the subject. Tell me about your painting, he said. The one with the umbrella. Something shuddered in her expression. Just for a second. What about it? Who are they? The woman and the little girl. Lily looked down at her coffee cup, tracing the rim with one finger. My mom. And me. From before. Before what? Before she died. Before the foster homes. Before everything fell apart. Steve's heart clenched. I'm sorry. It's okay. I was 7. I barely remember her, really. But I remember that umbrella. It was red with little white polka dots. She said it was magic. Magic how? She said as long as we stayed under it together, nothing bad could happen to us. The pain in her voice was so raw, so real, that Steve forgot about boundaries and payments and all the reasons this was complicated. He reached over and took her hand. I'm sorry, he said again. She squeezed his fingers. Some magic doesn't last, I guess. They sat like that for a while, holding hands in the dark, and Steve thought about umbrellas and protection and how sometimes the things we think will keep us safe are the very things that break us. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Dinners that weren't dates, but felt like them. Long walks through neighborhoods Steve had never seen despite living in the city for 15 years. Quiet evenings in Lily's apartment where she painted and he worked on his laptop, content just to be in the same space. It was comfortable, easy in a way that nothing in Steve's life had ever been easy. But it was also torture. Because every casual touch, every shared laugh, every moment of connection was shadowed by the knowledge that this had all started as a transaction. That somewhere, in the back of both their minds, was the memory of Rita handing over an envelope full of cash. One evening, they were making dinner together in Lily's tiny kitchen. And by making dinner, I mean Lily was cooking while Steve tried not to set anything on fire. When he finally worked up the courage to say what had been eating at him for weeks. I want to give you something, he said. What? She didn't look up from the onions she was chopping. Money. For art supplies. For a better apartment. For. No. The word was sharp. Final. Lily. I said no. She set down the knife and turned to face him, and there was something fierce in her expression. I'm not for sale, Steve. I didn't mean it like that. I know what you meant. But that's the problem. You don't know how to give without paying. You don't know how to care about someone without trying to fix them with your wallet. The words stung because they were true. I just want to help. Why? Because you deserve better than this. He gestured around the tiny kitchen, immediately regretting it when her face hardened. Better than what? My life. My apartment? My choices? That's not what I meant, isn't it? She turned back to the stove, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. You want to know what I think, she said without looking at him. What? I think you like the idea of rescuing me. The poor girl from the foster system who needs saving. It makes you feel good about yourself. That's not, isn't it? She whirled around, and there were tears in her eyes. You hired me to pretend to be your girlfriend because you couldn't get a real one. And now you want to pay me to be grateful for your charity. What's next, Steve? You're going to buy me a house, set up a trust fund, make me into your perfect project. The words hit like physical blows. You don't understand, he said desperately. I care about you. You care about the idea of me, the version of me that makes you feel like a good person. That's not true. But even as he said it, part of him wondered if it was. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I think you should go. Lily, please. Just go. So he went. But not before he saw her painting again. The one with the red umbrella, propped against the wall like a reminder of all the magic that doesn't last. 3 days later, Steve was miserable. He'd thrown himself into work, staying at the office until midnight, coming in before dawn. Anything to avoid the silence of his penthouse. Anything to avoid thinking about the look on Lily's face when she'd asked him to leave. But work wasn't working. Every line of code reminded him of their conversations about connection. Every meeting reminded him of how she'd made him feel like he belonged somewhere. Rita found him on Thursday, slumped over his desk like a man who'd given up on everything. You look like hell, she announced, settling into the chair across from him. Thanks. Very helpful. When's the last time you ate? Steve shrugged. Food seemed pointless lately. Rita studied him with the same intensity she brought to managing his public image. You're in love with her. It wasn't a question. Doesn't matter, Steve said. Why not? Because she's right. I don't know how to care about someone without trying to fix them. I don't know how to want something without trying to buy it. So learn. Steve looked up at her. What? Learn how to love someone without trying to save them. Learn how to want someone for who they are, not who you think they could be. And how do I do that? Rita's smile was softer than usual. Start by figuring out what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what would look good on paper. What you actually, desperately, can't live without want. I want her, Steve said quietly. I want Lily. Not because she needs saving. Not because I can fix her life. I want her because she makes me laugh. Because she argues with me about movies. Because she sees me, really sees me, and somehow doesn't run away. Then tell her that. She won't listen. Not after what I said. Then show her. How? Rita leaned forward. You're a genius, Steve. You built a company from nothing. You revolutionized how people connect. Figure it out. That night, Steve sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city lights, and tried to figure out how to show someone you love them without trying to save them. How to want someone without trying to buy them. How to be vulnerable without being patronizing. How to love someone exactly as they are, not as who you think they could become. It was the hardest problem he'd ever tried to solve. But maybe it was also the most important. The penthouse was too quiet. For the first time in 15 years, Steve actually noticed the silence. Really noticed it. The way it pressed against his eardrums like water. The way it made every small sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic 47 floors below, seemed amplified and lonely. He'd always liked the quiet before. Quiet meant focus. Quiet meant productivity. Quiet meant no one could disappoint you because no one was there to begin with. But now the quiet felt different. Now it felt empty. 3 weeks. 21 days since Lily had asked him to leave her apartment. Since she'd looked at him with those eyes full of hurt and said, I'm not for sale, Steve. 3 weeks of throwing himself into work, staying at the office until security had to practically drag him out. 3 weeks of pretending that lines of code could fill the space where conversations with her used to be. It wasn't working. Nothing was working. Steve stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the city wake up below him. Somewhere out there, Lily was probably opening the bakery, measuring flour with those careful hands, smiling at customers who had no idea they were talking to the most extraordinary woman in New York. Somewhere out there, she was living her life. Without him, his phone buzzed. Marcus, probably. Or Rita with another crisis that needed managing. Or some investor who wanted to discuss quarterly projections over lunch at a restaurant where the waiters wore ties. But when he looked at the screen, his heart stopped. Unknown number. But the message made his chest tight. She hasn't been the same since you left. Steve stared at the text, reading it 3 times before his brain processed what it meant. Someone was talking about Lily. His fingers shook as he typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Mrs. Chun. From next door. She gave me your number. Said you might want to know she's been crying. Mrs. Chun. The elderly woman who lived next to Lily. Who watched soap operas too loud and somehow knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. She's been crying? Steve typed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every night for 3 weeks. Thin walls. I hear everything. Steve closed his eyes. The image of Lily crying, alone in that tiny apartment, surrounded by her paintings and her plants and her beautiful, stubborn independence, made something crack open in his chest. Why are you telling me this? Because she loves you, you stupid boy. And you love her. And life is too short for this much crying. Mrs. Chin didn't pull punches, apparently. She won't want to see me, Steve typed. Then don't make her see you. Make her hear you. Before he could ask what that meant, another message appeared. The bakery. She stays late on Thursdays to do inventory. Alone. If you're going to do something stupid and romantic, do it then. Steve stared at his phone for a long time. Then he looked around his penthouse, at the marble countertops and the imported furniture and the view that real estate agents called priceless, and realized none of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. What mattered was a woman with paint-stained fingers who argued with him about movies and made him feel like he belonged somewhere. What mattered was figuring out how to love someone without trying to save them. What mattered was being brave enough to try. That's when Rita burst through his door like a force of nature in designer heels. You're sulking, she announced, setting down her purse and fixing him with a look that could melt steel. I'm working. You're avoiding. Steve turned away from the window. She left, Rita. It's over. She didn't leave. You drove her away. The words hit like a slap. Clean and sharp and absolutely true. I know, he said quietly. Rita's expression softened slightly. Do you love her? Yes. Really love her? Not the idea of her, not the project of her, but her? The woman who lives above a bakery and argues with you about everything and sees right through your bullshit? Yes. Then act like it. How? The question came out desperate, broken. How do I show someone I love them without trying to fix them? How do I prove I want them for who they are, not who I think they could be? Rita sat down across from him, her expression unusually gentle. You want to know the difference between love and charity, Steve? He nodded. Charity is about making yourself feel better. Love is about making the other person feel seen. Charity says, let me fix your problems. Love says, let me understand your dreams. I don't know her dreams. Then maybe that's where you start. That evening, Steve found himself standing outside the bakery at 8 p.m., heart in his throat, and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. The lights were still on inside. Through the window, he could see Lily moving around, taking inventory, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired, beautiful and tired, and so real it made his chest ache. He almost lost his nerve, almost walked away. But then he remembered Mrs. Chen's text. She's been crying. And he remembered Rita's words. Love is about making the other person feel seen. So instead of knocking, instead of forcing a conversation she didn't want to have, Steve did something else. Something that had nothing to do with money or fixing or saving. Something that was just about seeing her. Really seeing her. He pulled out his phone and started typing. Not a text to her. She'd probably delete it without reading. But a message to someone else. Someone who might be able to help him show Lily what she meant to him without trying to buy his way into her heart. 20 minutes later, Marcus appeared with a box of art supplies. Not expensive ones. Not the kind that screamed, rich guy trying to impress you. Just good, solid supplies from the art store down the street. Are you sure about this, sir? Marcus asked. No, Steve admitted. But I have to try. Marcus smiled. That's progress. What? Being unsure, but trying anyway. That's what love looks like. They set up outside the bakery. Not a grand gesture. Steve had learned his lesson about those. Just a simple easel, a canvas, and paint. And then Steve started to paint. He wasn't good at it. Not even close. His hands shook. The colors bled together wrong. The proportions were all off. But he painted anyway. He painted the view from Lily's tiny apartment window. The one she looked out every morning while drinking coffee that was too strong and planning her day. He painted the way the morning light hit the building across the street, casting shadows she'd probably sketched 100 times. He painted her world, the one she'd built herself, piece by careful piece. People started to notice. Pedestrians slowed down, curious about the well-dressed man making a mess with watercolors on the sidewalk. Some took pictures. A few left tips in a coffee cup Marcus had placed nearby, thinking Steve was a street artist. But Steve barely noticed them. All his attention was focused on the canvas, on trying to capture something true, something real, something that said, "I see you," instead of "let me save you." He was adding details to the fire escape, the one where Lily hung her laundry because she didn't have a dryer, when the bakery door opened behind him. "What are you doing?" Her voice was quiet, careful, like she was afraid of the answer. Steve didn't turn around, couldn't turn around. His heart was beating so loud, he was sure she could hear it. "Learning," he said. "Learning what?" "How to see you, instead of trying to fix you." He heard her take a step closer. "It's terrible," she said, and there was something in her voice. Something that might have been amusement. "I know. The perspective is all wrong. I know. And you use too much water with the blue. I know." Another step. Close enough now that he could smell her perfume. Something light and clean that reminded him of Sunday mornings. "Why?" she asked. And finally, Steve turned around. She was standing there in her bakery apron, flour in her hair, looking at him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Because I wanted to understand what it feels like," he said. "To create something because it matters to you, not because someone will pay you for it." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Steve, I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm sorry I tried to buy your affection. I'm sorry I made you feel like a project. I'm sorry I don't know how to love someone without trying to save them." "You don't. But I want to learn." The words came out in a rush. "I want to learn how to be with you without trying to fix you. How to support your dreams instead of replacing them with mine." Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour on her cheek. "What dreams?" she asked quietly. And that's when Steve realized he'd been asking the wrong questions all along. He'd been so focused on what she needed, what he could give her, what problems he could solve, that he'd never asked about what she wanted, what she hoped for, what she dreamed about when she couldn't sleep. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never asked." "No," she said softly. "You never did." They stood there in the lamplight, paint drying on Steve's terrible canvas, the city moving around them like they were the only two people who mattered. "Will you tell me," he asked, "about your dreams?" Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the painting, really looked at it, and something shifted in her expression. "You painted my view," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's yours. Because it matters to you. Because I wanted to see it the way you see it." And for the first time in 3 weeks, Lily smiled. "It's still terrible," she said. "I know. But it's sweet. In a completely hopeless kind of way." Steve's heart lifted. "Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." But she was still smiling. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. Lily didn't say anything else that night. Not then. But she didn't walk away either. Instead, she stood there looking at Steve's terrible painting while he packed up his art supplies with hands that shook just slightly. The silence between them wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was waiting. "Thank you," she said finally, as Marcus helped load the easel into the car. "For what?" "For not trying to give me money this time." It was such a small thing, such a simple observation, but somehow it felt like forgiveness. Or maybe the beginning of forgiveness. 2 days later, she showed up at his office. Steve was in a meeting with investors, 3 men in identical suits discussing quarterly projections and market expansion, when his assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." "I'm in a meeting." She said to tell you she's tired of standing in the rain alone. Steve's heart stopped. The umbrella. She was talking about the painting. About her mother. About magic that doesn't last. "Excuse me," he told the investors, and walked out of the most important meeting he'd had all year without a backward glance. Lily was standing in his office, looking completely out of place among the glass and chrome and imported leather. She wore jeans and a sweater with a small hole in the elbow. Her hair was in a ponytail. She looked nervous. She looked beautiful. "Hi," she said. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. "You left a meeting," she said. "Yeah." "An important meeting?" "They're all important meetings." "But you left anyway." Steve stepped closer. "You're more important." Something flickered across her face. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not?" "Because." She gestured helplessly. Because 3 weeks ago you thought you could buy me a better life. Because this whole thing started with you paying me to pretend. Because I don't know if you want me or if you want to save me. I want you, Steve said quietly. Not because you need saving. Not because I can fix your life. I want you because you make me laugh. Because you argue with me about movies. Because you see me, really see me, and somehow don't run away screaming. Lily's eyes filled with tears. You want to know what my dreams are? She asked. Yes. I dream about having my own gallery someday. Nothing fancy. Just a little space where I can show my work and maybe teach art classes to kids who can't afford them otherwise. Steve nodded, not saying anything, just listening. I dream about traveling. About painting landscapes that aren't views from fire escapes. About seeing the ocean and mountains and places where the sky is bigger than the buildings. That sounds amazing. I dream about having a family, she continued, her voice getting softer. Not the foster care kind. The real kind. The kind where people choose to stay. The words hit Steve like a physical blow. Good. Painful. Real. What else? He asked. I dream about waking up next to someone who loves me for exactly who I am. Someone who doesn't want to change me, or improve me, or save me from my life. She looked at him then, really looked at him. But mostly, I dream about not being afraid anymore. Afraid of what? Of wanting things. Of hoping for things. Of caring about someone so much that losing them would break me. Steve's throat felt tight. Lily, I'm tired of being afraid, she said. I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you because caring is scary. I'm tired of acting like what we have isn't real just because it started as pretend. She reached into her bag and pulled something out. The painting. The one with the red umbrella. This is yours, she said, holding it out to him. If you mean it. If this is real. Steve took the painting like it was made of glass. Like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. What does it mean? He asked, even though he thought he knew. It means I'm tired of standing in the rain alone. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. And if I take this? Steve asked. Then you're promising to stay. Through the storms. Through the hard parts. Through all the times when loving me isn't easy or convenient or simple. And if I promise that, then maybe we can figure out what real magic looks like. Steve set the painting carefully on his desk. Then he stepped closer to Lily, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. I promise, he said. You don't even know what you're promising. I'm promising to stay. I'm promising to love you exactly as you are. I'm promising to support your dreams instead of trying to replace them with mine. What if I'm difficult? You're already difficult. She laughed, and the sound was like music. What if I'm stubborn? You're already stubborn. What if I never fit into your world? Then we'll build our own world. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could count her eyelashes. What if I love you back? She whispered. Then we'll figure it out together. And then, finally, she kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. That had happened weeks ago, in a moment of pretending that felt more real than anything else in his life. But this was different. This was a promise. This was a choice. This was real. When they broke apart, Lily rested her forehead against his. I do, she said softly. You do what? Love you back. Just so we're clear. Steve smiled. Actually smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and made his whole face transform. Good, he said. Because I was starting to worry this grand gesture thing was going to become a habit. She laughed. Your painting was terrible. I know. But it was also perfect. How can something be terrible and perfect? Because it was real. Because you made it for me, not because someone would pay you for it. Because you saw something that mattered to me and tried to understand it. That night, they cooked dinner together in Lily's tiny kitchen. Actually cooked. No takeout, no catering, no restaurants with names Steve couldn't pronounce. Just pasta and sauce from a jar and vegetables that Lily chopped while Steve tried not to burn the garlic. It was domestic. Ordinary. The kind of evening that wasn't worth writing about in newspapers or discussing at board meetings. It was perfect. They talked about everything and nothing. About her gallery dreams and his expansion plans. About whether pineapple belonged on pizza, she said yes. He said absolutely not. They agreed to disagree. About the logistics of combining two very different lives into something that worked for both of them. You know this won't be easy, Lily said as they sat on her beat-up couch, her feet tucked under his leg. Nothing worth having is easy. I'm serious. Your world, my world, they don't exactly overlap. So we build bridges. She looked at him. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you. You love me. Everything else is just details. What if the details matter? Then we'll figure them out. Together. Lily was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns on his hand with her finger. Can I tell you something? She said. Anything. The night we met at the coffee shop? When Rita first introduced us? Yeah. I almost said no. To the whole thing. To pretending to be your girlfriend. Why didn't you? Because you looked so sad. So lonely. And I thought maybe we could help each other. Help each other how? You needed someone to make you look less alone. I needed to remember what it felt like to matter to someone, even if it was just pretend. Steve's chest tightened. It was never pretend. Not for me. I know, she said softly. That's what scared me. And now I'm still scared. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. Later, as they got ready for bed, Lily in her tiny bathroom, Steve borrowing a toothbrush and trying not to think about how domestic this all felt. He pulled something from his pocket. A receipt. From the night they met. From the coffee shop where everything started. I kept this, he said when Lily emerged from the bathroom. She looked at the piece of paper, confused. Why? Because it reminded me that even fake things can feel real. But now, he folded the receipt carefully and tucked it away. Now I want real things to feel even better. Lily smiled. The kind of smile that lit up her whole face. They do, she said. And then she kissed him again. Outside, the city lights blinked like stars. Cars honked. People lived their lives in apartments and penthouses and everything in between. Inside Lily's tiny apartment, the radiator clanked and Mrs. Chin's television murmured through the thin walls. But for the first time in their lives, neither Steve nor Lily felt alone. There was music playing softly from Lily's ancient radio. There was laughter echoing off the walls. There was the sound of two people who'd found their way to each other despite every reason why they shouldn't fit. And somewhere, in the space between what was and what could be, there was the hum of two hearts figuring it out. Together, the red umbrella painting sat on Lily's kitchen table, catching the lamplight. A reminder that some magic does last, if you're brave enough to stay under it together. Even when it storms. Especially when it storms.